Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Analysis. I'm your host, Maz Patel. We turn our attention to the world's worst man-made humanitarian disaster in Sudan, where the conflict has taken a devastating new turn. Just hours after ceasefire talks collapsed in Washington, the Rapid Support Forces stormed the city of Al-Fashir, the last stronghold of the Sudanese armed forces in Darfur. The talks, led by the Trump administration envoy Masad Boulos and backed by the UAE, Egypt, Saudi Arabia and the United States, failed to bring the warring sides together. Delegates from the SAF and the RSF refused to speak directly, and diplomatic sources say the UAE, a key RSF backer, blocked any discussion of Al-Fashir. The RSF, already accused of genocide elsewhere in Darfur, has laid mines around the city, blocked humanitarian aid, and carried out massacres in displacement camps. Sudan's foreign minister has now labelled the UAE an enemy, not a mediator, and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called on all countries supplying weapons to stop. Sources close to the talks say the US demanded SAF reduce Islamist influence, cut ties with Iran, and support the Abraham Accords, as well as other measures like countering Russian and Chinese economic interests. In return, the SAF called for the dismantling of the RSF and an end to the UAE's involvement in the war. Sudan's civil war began in April 2023. Since then, it has killed tens of thousands and displaced over 13 million people. With the fall of Al-Fashir, Sudan is now effectively split. The SAF controls the east and the RSF the west. Let's take a closer look at the situation on the ground.
Sudan's paramilitary Rapid Support Forces say they've captured the final holdout of the Sudanese army in Darfur. That's raising fears of a split in the country, which is torn between rival military groups. The capture of the city of Al-Fashir ends a brutal 18-month siege by the RSF. On Sunday, the group said it had taken over the local headquarters of Sudan's army. Since then, sources have said RSF fighters had detained fleeing civilians in nearby towns and villages. And on Monday, sources told Reuters the RSF had surrounded thousands of soldiers from the army. In a televised statement, Sudan's army chief said his forces, quote, assessed a need to retreat.
Everyone has followed what happened in Al-Fashir. Certainly, the leadership there, including security, made assessments that they have to leave the city due to the systematic destruction and killing of civilians. We agreed with them to leave the city and go to a safe place so as to spare the rest of the citizens and the rest of the city from destruction.
The RSF has been locked in a civil war with Sudan's army for more than 2.5 years. The two sides fell out over plans to integrate their forces during a transition towards democracy. Analysts say the RSF's taking of Al-Fashir may help them regain other territory around the country and grant them a diplomatic edge. Alan Boswell is with the International Crisis Group in Nairobi.
It improves their military position in Sudan, which also improves their negotiating position in any peace talks. But I think the focus on Al-Fashir was for a number of strategic reasons, including the political leverage it would give them. So yes, because they now would control more of Sudan, it will probably increase their confidence at the negotiating table and harden their demands at the negotiating table.
Some activists have long warned that an RSF takeover of the city would lead to ethnic revenge attacks of the 250,000 people remaining there. That was seen after the capture of the Zamzam camp for displaced people to the south. A UN-mandated mission said last month the RSF had committed multiple crimes against humanity in the Al-Fashir siege. The army has also been accused of war crimes. Unless US-backed peace talks make progress, it could all worsen a conflict that's already displaced millions, plunged half of Sudan into hunger, and spread disease throughout the country.
Residents of Al-Fashir are now trying to protect themselves from drone strikes and shelling as attacks on civilian infrastructure intensify. The famine-stricken city has endured an 18-month siege and is the army's last holdout in
This is the aftermath of an attack on a centre housing displaced people in Sudan's Al-Fashir. Locals say it was the work of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. Repeated drone strikes during prayers left 57 dead, including 17 children, among them 3 babies, according to the centre's manager. Residents say it is now the reality of life in famine-stricken Al-Fashir. It is the Sudanese army's last holdout in the vast western region of Darfur as it battles the RSF in a 2.5-year-long civil war. The army has been gaining ground elsewhere in Sudan, but Darfur is the RSF's stronghold. It aims to base a parallel government there, potentially geographically splintering the country. More than 1 million have fled Al-Fashir during an 18-month siege by the RSF, according to the UN. An estimated 250,000 civilians remain, but it has become dangerous and expensive to leave, and there are fears of mass reprisals if the city falls. More than a dozen residents told Reuters by phone those still in the city have dug bunkers for protection after repeated strikes on civilians. People also describe avoiding drones by limiting their movements and large gatherings in the daytime and not using lights after dark. One doctor said they avoid being seen by sticking to the wall like a gecko. A local journalist said it has become normal to only bury their dead at night or very early in the morning. Here at the Abu Shuk camp, an attack took place on a soup kitchen for those displaced by the fighting.
The drone incident that happened and this shelling wasn't a one-off. This happens maybe about 3 times a day, and then we run to the shelters. 4 or more of us died and a number of people were injured. I honestly don't know the number.
Activists from a local network say on average 30 people a day are dying from violence, hunger and disease. According to Yale Humanitarian Research Lab, as of October 4th, the RSF had almost fully encircled Al-Fashir. Activists warn even animal feed people had resorted to eating had become unavailable. Neither the army nor the RSF responded to written requests or calls seeking comment.
So joining me now to discuss the crisis in Sudan are Dr. Mohammed Elamin Osman, a political analyst, and Dr. Matthew Hedges, an academic and author. Welcome to you both. Let's start off with you, Mohammed. Tell us what the situation is now. I said in my opening intro that Sudan is effectively split between the East and West, between the SAF and the RSF. Is that now a portent for Sudan to be further split into East Sudan and West Sudan?
So when we look at the scene from the military lens, the areas of control of the Sudanese armed forces and the Rapid Support Forces militia do seem roughly to go along those lines. However, since September of 2024, and certainly since March of this year, the Sudanese armed forces have made substantial gains west of the White Nile into the lands of the Kordofan region, with mainly the aim of initially relieving the siege, the 2-year siege that Al-Fashir had been subjected to. Now, the latest developments over the 48 last hours, Al-Fashir has pretty much fallen into the hands of the RSF, and there has been renewed fighting in areas of northern Kordofan state, particularly around the town of Bara, which is pretty much on the road between the largest town of Kordofan al-Ubaid and the Sudanese capital, Khartoum. And this was because of a very swift and surprising attack carried out by the RSF forces. However, whether the country will actually split into East and West, I do think, despite that this has been a common theme amongst many commentators, I don't think that that is necessarily going to be the state. There will be spheres of influence and control. However, I think it remains to be seen, and I think that the Sudanese army will still aim to push westwards. They probably have good opportunities in northern Kordofan and in parts of western Kordofan, but where the main strongholds of support for the RSF, particularly in East and South Darfur, this might be more difficult. Now, though Al-Fashir has fallen, I suspect the RSF will find it quite a difficult job unless they receive a large or substantial amount of foreign aid from Libya in the north or Chad in the west. But North Darfur might not actually be the easy kind of piece of cake that they might be hoping for, which will translate, unfortunately, into more bloodshed and certainly much more atrocities, such as of the scale that already we are beginning to witness now in El-Fashir and the neighboring areas.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Matthew, this conflict has seen, is under the radar, but it's had a devastating impact for the Sudanese people. 14 million refugees. I mean, those are numbers beyond a biblical scale, if one were to put it into those terms. And people keep talking about bringing peace and ending this civil war. Certainly the Trump administration has tried to make some efforts, but is the world really interested in Sudan at all?
Fundamentally, no. This is due to, I suppose, a long-held prejudice, the idea that conflicts in Africa don't really matter, as well as the fact that it's easy to point to, say, communities in the West and say, where is that lack of support? Where is that lack of concern? But there's also a depoliticization of it within the region. There's the idea that this civil war is being conducted against, say, Islamists. It's being conducted against who are effectively political opponents of, in the primary case, of the UAE. That this is an anarchic state, and that in the case of the UAE, that the RSF and Abu Dhabi are at least trying to bring some stability. They're trying to bring some toleration and mediation. This is where that narrative is, certainly within the region, because the counter narratives to this are also lacking. There's a lack of confidence in the West to call out this behavior. There's also a lack of that same confidence to call out this behavior within the region.
Mohammed, many people balk against external influence. We know the Sudanese, the SAF, have always accused the UAE of, deliberately intervening in its civil war. But tell me why would the UAE do that? What are its interests in Sudan, ostensibly?
Well, I think it's important to note that, interestingly, even before the Sudanese armed forces and certainly the Sudanese government made formal allegations against the UAE and formal complaints at different levels of international bodies, these allegations were actually carried through respected Western media outlets such as the New York Times, such as The Guardian here in the UK, as well as organizations such as Amnesty International and other different organizations and observers who closely follow events in Sudan. If anything, there seemed to be some reluctance initially on the part of Sudanese official bodies to actually name the UAE in name during the first phases of the war. Now, there are many reasons why the UAE might be interested or might have a stake. And I think if we were to cite or quote, the best quote would be one from Dr. Ibtisam al-Kutubi, who is an executive manager of a leading UAE Abu Dhabi-based think tank, where she openly said in a podcast, which is available online, that the UAE had interests in Sudan, which it would fight for, and these were economic interests and of a substantial amount of money and resources, and also because, as Dr. Hedges mentioned, the UAE was carrying a fight against, quote unquote, the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, there's lots of holes and lots of question marks in that narrative about this whole Muslim Brotherhood business and how convenient a bogeyman or scarecrow that's being used. I mean, it will sell obviously with the narratives of the war on terrorism and the war against extremism, and that's part of the game. But economically, there are issues at stake, such as security of the Red Sea, the fact that the UAE has aggressively pushed over the last decade or so for more influence and control over different ports, whether in Djibouti, whether with Eritrea, whether much more obviously with Yemen, and so on. Then comes the issue of gold. Until recently, exclusive use and export of Sudanese gold was through UAE ports and airports. And also, there were vast lands which had been given to the UAE for agricultural purposes in northern Sudan. And Sudan has an important geopolitical uh, location in the region, and also because of recent political history as well, with the demise of the Bashir regime in 2019. And the UAE has certainly been an important stakeholder in Sudanese politics lately. They have also enjoyed the services of the RSF, particularly in Yemen. And this is how this relationship is widely believed to have actually been formulated
Sure.
through the role that the RSF was playing in Yemen and potentially in other areas where there has been some UAE influence or UAE interest. So it's quite a wide-ranging portfolio, if one could describe it in such words.
Matthew, I asked you previously about whether the world was ignoring Sudan, whether it was on the map. I think those were the words I used. You obviously said no, but listening to what Mohammed just described, it seems that certainly for the UAE, this is a very, very important country and it needs to intervene in there. There are others who are alleged to be also interfering, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and other regional countries. What do you think is the role of the international community? Because many people, whenever these conflicts arise, or there's always a difference between those who promote interventionism and those who say, well, we shouldn't intervene in other countries and we should let them sort their problems out. Is it as simple as that?
No, it isn't as simple as that, because yes, the UAE is the interventionist state in this regard, the primary interventionist. Of course, there's say other further afield, such as Iran, such as Russia. Saudi Arabia and Egypt do certainly advocate more for the status quo, the stabilization of the region, but the heightened engagement of say Egypt, of Saudi Arabia, of Turkey is also in response to the UAE's own engagement. There is an element of geopolitical competition that has arisen as a result of Abu Dhabi's own sustained activities. Mm-hmm. If the UAE hadn't committed such resources over such a prolonged amount of time, there is a case that they wouldn't have maybe provided the support that they are now. Mm-hmm. Egypt certainly is concerned about the potential for cross-border insecurity, especially when you then look further into the Sahel or across Africa. And again, with Turkey, they want to protect their interests across the entirety of the Horn of Africa, but they are being forced to deploy, more assets, to deploy more support, because Abu Dhabi is actually it's rivaling and it's competing with those held interests.
So, Matthew, just to stay with you, so in terms of the diplomatic efforts taking place from the Trump administration's point of view, where does that stand? Is it genuinely trying to resolve this dispute, or is it just a hands-off approach to make sure that people don't feel that the United States is not engaged in some way?
So that's nearly, that was going to be my response, that Washington's concern is twofold. Primarily, and firstly, and I've heard this, from the horse's mouth, so to say, they want to reduce any potential for US engagement, any attribution of equipment. They don't want to have any, they don't want to be found to be supporting or having a tacit engagement in this. The second point is, and this is something replicated in many other capitals, is Washington is under pressure from both Saudi Arabia and the UAE to support and back their visions.
Mm-hmm.
And what's ending up happening, and you also see this in Yemen, Washington is then not committing to one policy or another, and in effect allowing the sustainment of the current dynamics. It's somewhat afraid to go against the Emirati wishes because the Emiratis have pledged over $1.5 trillion in investments, while at the same time they understand that publicly rebuking and going against the wishes of, say, Saudi Arabia, one of the regional hegemons, is also difficult.
Balancing act. Thank you. Mohammed, in terms of where you believe events will be landing over the next, say, 3 to 6 months, I'm not going to ask you for longer than that. How do you think the war is going to be continuing to progress? Where do you think it's going to be? I said, is it going to be a split between East and West? You weren't completely sure. Do you think there's even a possibility of a decisive outcome for one side or the other?
So, in fact, for the next 6 months, it's probably unlikely that you'll see a decisive military victory by either of the warring parties. What we might see is a tilting of the balance in favor of one of them. Now, at the moment, a week ago, it was looking like that that the SAF had the upper hand, that they were progressing through North Kurdistan, although much slower than what they would have wanted or what might have been anticipated. But this fast blow that was received in the Bara region came as a surprise. That might destabilize the North Kurdistan region. And certainly Darfur is going to take some time because it's you have to look at these are vast areas. When we speak of Darfur, we are speaking of an area the size of continental Spain. This is not a small area. It's a vast area, and that's Darfur, not including Kurdistan. So you're looking at overrunning what is basically the equivalent of two major countries in continental Europe.
Yes.
So even just Khartoum state itself, which took nearly more than a year and a half to liberate by the Sudanese army. That's an area twice the area of Lebanon. These are the vast areas that you're looking at in Sudan, and therefore a decisive military victory will take time. But what we will probably see is a war of attrition. We will probably see advances here and there. And I think some of the external and certainly regional powers are looking to invest in this kind of stalemate to create some form of a balance of weakness through which they might wish to enforce or bring in ready-made formulas for what they see as a political solution. This is something which the US envoy, or Masad Bulus, referred to 2 days ago in a TV interview. I think it was with Al-Hadith, where he kind of, and this has led to accusations of a form of US involvement, where he kind of alluded to the fact that he kind of felt that if Al-Fashir felt it might have the paradoxical positive effect of pushing both parties to the negotiation table.
Okay. Mohammed, final word to you, Matthew. Do you think negotiation and an end to the conflict is anywhere on the horizon as we speak?
Sadly, no. And that's the UAE is deliberately playing into the scale and the dynamics across the region. We are talking about Sudan, but there's also heightened regional engagement and mediation for Gaza, for Syria, for Yemen, for Libya. The idea is while Saudi Arabia is going back to the previous point that they are as a regional hegemon, they then have to take the lead on these issues. Whereas Abu Dhabi and the UAE can easily just simply portray itself, or not portray itself, they can play the role, of instigator trying to leverage their own interests above the greater good, above human concerns. And while Saudi Arabia tries to balance these multilateral engagements, they try to bring these different parties together, the UAE can simply go and concentrate its efforts behind the RSF in Sudan, behind successionists in Yemen. They can do this with other parties in other areas. That's much easier to control and to leverage.
Okay.
And when we're then going back to the immediate borders of Sudan, look at the danger and the risk that's been highlighted by its neighbors to say, listen, we are now at direct risk of this cross-border retaliation, but that's something which has been deliberately manufactured by Abu Dhabi to heighten the risk, to heighten the outcomes.
Okay, well, listen, thank you so much to both of my guests. It's been quite interesting to learn about Sudan. I mean, it's off the horizon, off the radar, but we'll certainly be covering it on our channel. And much like the Ukraine conflict, it seems to be an endless a war of attrition between two parties. I've been Mas Patel. This is Analysis, and I'll see you again soon.